You know, you really wouldn't put a ticking time bomb in your baby's nursery, right?
No, obviously not. I mean, nobody would do that intentionally.
Right. And if you bought, like, a plastic cribs,
Yeah.
and the manufacturer knew the legs were just prone to collapsing randomly in the middle of the night.
Consumer protection agencies would be all over it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They'd have that product off the shelves by morning. I mean, we have centuries of engineering standards that basically make physical safety a binary expectation.
Yeah, it's either safe or it's recalled. There's no middle ground there.
But, legally speaking, that digital baby monitor you just plugged in next to the crib, it's traditionally carried fewer safety guarantees than the cardboard box it came in.
Which is wild when you really think about it.
It is. You bring these incredibly complex digital devices into the most intimate spaces of your life, and you just kind of, cross your fingers.
Yeah, because the digital realm has operated under a completely different set of assumptions for decades now. I mean, we demand testing and certification and these ironclad guarantees before a toaster even crosses the threshold of our homes.
But a toaster can't track your location.
Exactly. Yet we install software that tracks our heart rates, our locations, our children, without a second thought about the underlying liability. It is the absolute definition of diagnostic muddy waters.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. I'm so glad you're joining us today because we are unpacking a document that is going to fundamentally change the devices you have sitting on your desk right now.
It really is a massive shift.
The mission today is to dig into this pivotal press release and practical guidance document. It was published by the European Commission very recently on July 27, 2026.
Right, just a few weeks ago.
Yeah. And we're looking at the new operational blueprint for the Cyber Resilience Act, or the CRA. The goal here is to figure out how this legal framework attempts to secure our digital lives without inadvertently crushing the developers and the companies who actually build the tech we rely on.
And that is a monumental balancing act, let me tell you.
I can imagine.
Because, we all want the enormous benefits of these products. We want the seamless connectivity, the remote monitoring, the data analysis.
Oh, absolutely. I love checking my smartwatch.
Right. But we are also finally waking up to the reality of the vulnerabilities we've just blindly invited into our lives. Yeah. Historically, the tech industry has been allowed to prioritize speed to market over comprehensive security.
Ship it now, fix it later.
Exactly. But this mandate from the European Commission is an attempt to end that era completely. They are essentially establishing that, yes, you can have the innovation, but it must be paired with mandated legally binding security.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because the CRA itself isn't a brand new law that just passed today, right?
So not at all.
The document establishes a really clear timeline. It notes that the Cyber Resilience Act has actually been in force since December of 2024. So this framework has been looming over the industry for a while now.
Yeah, the law has been on the books for a bit, establishing these very clear mandatory cybersecurity requirements for basically any product with digital elements.
But there's a specific detail from the text that truly shifts the paradigm, isn't there?
Yes. It's the phrase full life cycle.
Right.
The requirements don't just apply at the point of sale anymore. They apply across the full life cycle of the digital product.
I really want to focus on that phrase because, to me, it just sounds like standard regulatory jargon. But it seems to be the absolute linchpin of this entire framework.
Oh, it changes everything.
Like if I buy a car, I don't just expect the brakes to work on the dealer's lot on a sunny Tuesday.
Right. You expect them to work for years.
Exactly. And if the manufacturer discovers a flaw in the brake line, like 3 years down the road, I expect a recall at their expense because it's a systemic safety issue.
Yeah.
So with this full life cycle requirement, are we finally forcing the software industry to adopt the safety standards of the physical hardware world?
It's a really solid analogy, but it actually breaks down in one key area.
Ooh, how so?
Well, think about it. You only take your car in for maintenance maybe a few times a year.
Yeah, if I'm being responsible.
Right. And a car doesn't dynamically change its structural composition while it's just sitting in your driveway.
That's true. The engine doesn't rearrange itself overnight.
Exactly. But software gets oil changes daily. A smartphone changes constantly with new code, patches, interactions with remote servers. The vulnerability of a digital product is entirely fluid.
Oh, wow. I didn't think about it like that. So it's a constantly moving target.
Exactly. By mandating security across the full life cycle, the European Commission is essentially eliminating that old tech industry exceptionalism.
Meaning what? Exactly.
Meaning you can no longer just build the software, run a quick pre-launch security scan, ship it out, and then wash your hands of the liability just because the user clicked agree on a 60-page terms of service document nobody reads.
Right, the classic not our problem anymore approach.
Yeah, exactly. Now, the manufacturer's responsibility stretches out for as long as that product is reasonably in use. They have to continuously monitor for new threats and push security patches.
Which brings up a really obvious tension here. If the CRA has been in force since December 2024, why is the European Commission stepping in with this massive brand new publication in July 2026?
That's the big question.
I mean, if the law is already passed, the ink is dry, right? Why are we getting new documents now?
Because passing a sweeping, paradigm-shifting law is merely step one.
Okay.
The pivot from the legislation existing on paper to the industry actually being capable of obeying it, that is where severe panic sets in.
So they're panicking.
Completely. The Commission published this practical guidance now because the reality of compliance is just violently colliding with the calendar. The industry, from the massive tech conglomerates all the way down to a two-person indie development team, they all desperately need to know the actual mechanics of obedience.
And looking at the source text, that panic seems entirely justified by a very aggressive ticking clock.
Extremely aggressive.
The document lays out this specific timeline. It says the main obligations of the CRA apply starting from December 11th, 2027.
Right.
So that's the heavy lift, the day every product has to be perfectly aligned with the security mandates. However, the reporting obligations apply starting from September 11th, 2026.
Which, in the timeline of corporate compliance, is essentially tomorrow morning.
Here's where it gets really interesting for developers listening to this right now, especially since we're in August of 2026.
Yeah, they're feeling the heat.
That September 11 reporting deadline is literally only weeks away. In a matter of days, companies must legally begin reporting exploited vulnerabilities and severe security incidents to authorities.
And they have to do it within a mandated 24-hour window.
Wow. Just 24 hours.
Yes, and the anxiety surrounding that 24-hour window is precisely why the Commission published this guidance right now. The source text frames this as a demonstration of the Commission's commitment to, quote, timely implementation.
So they know the industry is freaking out.
Oh, they're acutely aware that throwing a highly technical rulebook at an industry and expecting immediate flawless execution is just a recipe for market collapse.
Right. You can't just yell, be secure, and expect it to happen overnight.
Exactly. You have to actively teach the market how to comply. The text emphasizes that rather than leaving companies to navigate these dense regulations all alone, the Commission is stepping in early to provide an operational blueprint.
And the document specifically notes that this guidance is non-binding. That seems like a really critical legal distinction to make.
It's massive. Non-binding means the guidance document itself does not create new legal obligations. It serves as an official interpretation of the law.
So it's like a study guide for the test.
That's a great way to put it. By maintaining that non-binding status, the Commission basically creates a safe harbor. It provides clarity so companies can prepare, as the text says, confidently and efficiently.
Because if the guidance were legally binding,
then any slight misinterpretation in a flowchart could create an immediate legal trap. Or it could establish these rigid parameters that are technically impossible to meet in weird edge cases.
right, it would just cause more paralysis.
Exactly. The non-binding nature gives companies the breathing room to build their compliance infrastructure without the immediate threat of a massive lawsuit over a misunderstood definition.
Okay, so the Commission has tossed the industry this life raft of practical guidance to stop the panic over these 2026 and 2027 deadlines.
Basically, yeah.
And the text states that this document directly answers the questions stakeholders have been asking most frequently. They actually categorize these clarifications into 4 main pillars. Let's look at the first one, which is defining the scope of the CRA.
This is where we get into the weeds of who is actually affected.
Right. The guidance clarifies when products actually fall under the law, specifically calling out 2 things: remote data processing solutions and free and open source software.
Both of which were huge pain points for developers.
Let's start with open source, because regulating free software seems inherently contradictory to me.
It definitely sounds that way at first.
If a volunteer builds a cool tool on the weekend in their basement and posts the code online for free, how on earth do you hold them liable under a European Cybersecurity Act without entirely destroying the open source community?
And that open source community's fear was entirely justified. I mean, almost all modern software, including the most expensive top-tier enterprise systems, is built on a foundation of open-source libraries.
It's the building blocks of the internet.
Exactly. If the CRA criminalized hobbyist coding or required a weekend volunteer to perform a corporate-level risk assessment, the entire software ecosystem would just freeze overnight.
So how does the guidance fix that?
The July 2026 guidance steps in to clearly delineate the boundary of commercialization.
Wait, how is commercialization actually defined in this context? Because say that hobbyist puts a small donate button on their project page just to cover their server costs. Are they suddenly considered a commercial entity and fully liable under the CRA?
No, and that's the crucial clarification. The guidance drills down into the nuance of monetization versus commercial deployment. A donation button to keep a hobbyist project alive does not instantly trigger full CRA liability for that individual developer.
Oh, that is a huge relief for a lot of people listening.
Absolutely. The burden of compliance targets the entity that integrates that code into a commercial product.
Okay, give me an example.
Sure. So if a massive tech corporation takes that volunteer's open source library, bundles it into their new smart home hub, and then sells that hub for a profit at retail stores.
Then the corporation assumes the liability.
Exactly. The guidance ensures the volunteer is protected while simultaneously preventing the corporation from using the open source origin of the code as a legal loophole for shipping vulnerable products.
Right, the company can't just say, well, Dave on the internet wrote that part, so it's not our fault it got hacked.
Precisely. The company monetizing the final product must ensure the entire software bill of materials, including every single open source component, meets the CRA security standards.
That makes total sense. It shifts the legal burden to the entity actually profiting from the tech.
Which is how it should be.
Now, the second major scope clarification in this section deals with remote data processing solutions.
This one is just as tricky as open source.
Because the architectural boundaries of liability in modern software are incredibly blurred, right? An app on your smartphone rarely functions entirely on the local hardware in your hand.
Almost never. It constantly communicates with a remote server, perhaps a massive cloud processing farm on another continent.
Let's use a tangible example to ground this.
No.
Say I build a smart thermostat app. The app itself lives on the user's phone. But the heavy lifting like analyzing the weather patterns, adjusting the heating schedule dynamically, all of that happens on a cloud server I rent from AWS or Google.
A very standard setup.
Right. So if there's a vulnerability, where does my liability as the app developer end and the cloud provider's liability begin? Do I just point the finger at AWS?
You can't. And the guidance tackles this exact subcontractor dynamic directly.
Oh, really?
Yeah. If the remote data processing is a core, inextricably linked function of the digital product, meaning your smart thermostat literally cannot function as advertised without that specific cloud connection.
Which wouldn't. It'd just be a digital thermometer at that point.
Right. In that case, that remote processing falls entirely under the scope of your product's CRA compliance.
Wow.
You, as the developer bringing the thermostat to the market, are responsible for ensuring the entire chain is secure.
So I really cannot just point at my cloud provider and claim ignorance if a breach occurs on the server side, even if it compromises the thermostat.
Not under the CRA. The guidance forces developers to thoroughly audit the security of their remote data pipelines. They have to ensure those third-party services meet the rigorous standards demanded by the law. It completely prevents the fragmentation of liability in an interconnected digital ecosystem.
Okay, so that first major pillar is really about determining if the law even applies to your specific setup and where your boundaries are.
Exactly.
The second area of clarification dives into what happens when a product inevitably changes. The text notes the guidance defines what constitutes a substantial modification.
This is a huge one.
We talked about software needing daily oil changes earlier. If I take my car in to get the tires rotated, that's routine maintenance. If I rip out the engine and drop a totally new powertrain into the chassis, that's a substantial modification. But translating that concept to code seems incredibly difficult.
It is. And defining that boundary was causing absolute paralysis in the software industry.
I can see why.
Under regulatory frameworks like the CRA, introducing a new product to the market requires rigorous conformity assessments. You essentially have to prove its security from scratch.
Right.
If every single routine bug patch, typo fix, or minor feature update was legally classified as a substantial modification, the compliance clock would reset daily.
You'd need a dedicated team of lawyers just to approve a single line of code fixing a spelling error in a drop-down menu.
Exactly. The administrative bottleneck would destroy the ability to rapidly patch active security flaws. It would create this absurd scenario where a law designed to improve security actually prevents developers from deploying urgent fixes.
That would be a disaster.
So the industry desperately needed to know the exact threshold where an update stops being routine maintenance and triggers a full regulatory audit.
How does the guidance establish that threshold without leaving massive loopholes for companies to exploit?
Yeah.
Like if a company adds an entirely new AI monitoring feature to that baby monitor we talked about via a simple software update, does that trigger the recertification?
Yes. The guidance focuses on whether the update fundamentally alters the intended purpose or the overall risk profile of the product.
The risk profile.
Right. A security patch intended to close a vulnerability lowers the risk profile, so it is routine maintenance.
Makes sense.
However, pushing a firmware update that activates previously dormant hardware like, say, turning on a microphone for a new voice assistant feature in a device that was originally sold only as a visual baby monitor, that fundamentally changes the data collection and the risk profile.
Because now it's listening to the room, not just watching it.
Exactly. That is a substantial modification. By explicitly defining these parameters in the July 2026 text, the Commission allows developers to continue iterating and patching their software rapidly without the constant fear of accidentally triggering a massive regulatory penalty.
It provides the legal freedom to fix things safely.
Yes.
Which flows directly into the third area of the guidance, support periods. The text mentions clarifying how these periods should be understood and applied. Now, we touched on the idea of ongoing liability, but what exactly does a support period look like in practice for a manufacturer?
Basically, a support period is the legally defined length of time during which the manufacturer commits to providing security updates and handling vulnerabilities for a specific product.
So the box for our hypothetical baby monitor would effectively have to display an expiration date for its digital safety, like guaranteed secure until 2031.
Functionally, yes. That's exactly it.
Wow.
The guidance forces companies to explicitly state how long they will maintain the digital integrity of the product. And the critical mechanism here is that the support period must be proportionate to the expected lifetime of that device.
Oh, that's interesting. So they can't just pick a random date.
Right. A manufacturer cannot arbitrarily declare a one-year support period for a smart refrigerator because consumer expectation dictates a refrigerator should operate safely for a decade.
That completely upends the economics of the tech hardware industry, doesn't it? I mean, we are talking about the end of planned obsolescence.
The CRA is quietly mounting a massive challenge to the whole model of intentional technological expiration.
Which is huge.
It is. The industry has long relied on the reality that once they stop providing security patches for a perfectly functional smartphone or tablet, it eventually becomes too dangerous to connect to the internet.
Effectively forcing the consumer to buy the newest model.
Exactly. But if a company is now legally required to maintain dedicated engineering teams to write and deploy security patches for a smartwatch for 5, 6, or even 7 years,
the cost of ongoing maintenance suddenly eclipses the initial development cost.
Precisely. It shifts software economics from a one-time launch capital expenditure to an ongoing operational liability.
It's a huge financial burden.
It is, and the July 2026 guidance provides the specific formulas and considerations companies must use to calculate these proportionate timeframes. They can no longer abandon a connected device 6 months after the point of sale just because the next iteration has hit the shelves.
The financial implications of that are just staggering. And that leads us to the fourth and final pillar of the guidance, which ties back to that looming September 2026 deadline we talk about. The reporting obligations and risk assessment requirements.
Right, the 24-hour window.
Yeah. This seems to be where the theoretical ambition of the CRA becomes highly administrative.
It really is the mechanism of accountability. Translating theoretical security into tangible, auditable proof is the heaviest lift for any organization.
I bet.
I mean, it's one challenge to build a secure product. It is an entirely different logistical nightmare to maintain a documented taxonomy of risk assessments, categorize every incoming vulnerability report, and possess the infrastructure to notify European authorities of an active, severe cyber incident within that strict 24-hour window.
That 24-hour window is just brutal. If an exploit is discovered at 11 p.m. on a Friday, the company can't wait until Monday morning to assemble the legal team and figure out what to do.
They absolutely cannot. And the guidance serves as the blueprint for building that emergency alarm system.
How specific does it get?
Very. It outlines exactly what constitutes a severe incident requiring immediate notification versus, say, a minor anomaly that can just be logged internally for later review.
Okay, that helps.
Yeah, because for many companies, building this reporting infrastructure from scratch is incredibly daunting, and misclassifying an incident could lead to severe penalties. So the July 2026 text provides the necessary operational rubrics to ensure the alarm bells are wired correctly and ring at the appropriate threshold.
We've mapped out some massive requirements here. Defining complex scope boundaries, navigating substantial modifications, calculating multi-year support periods, and building 24-hour reporting pipelines.
It's a lot.
It's a ton. If you are a multinational tech conglomerate with unlimited resources and whole floors of compliance officers, sure, you can absorb this. But the text explicitly calls out a very different demographic. It highlights a focus on microenterprises and SMEs, small and medium-sized enterprises.
Which is a crucial demographic for innovation.
Right. If you are a 3-person indie development team working out of a rented garage, this level of regulatory burden sounds fatal.
The European Commission is acutely aware of the regulatory paradox here.
Which
Broad, complex legislation inherently favors massive monopolies because only they can afford the friction of compliance.
No, right.
If a regulatory audit costs $500,000, a tech giant just writes it off as a rounding error, but an indie developer, they liquidate their company.
They're done.
Exactly. And if the CRA crushes the microenterprises, it simultaneously crushes the next generation of technological innovation in Europe.
The source text details how the Commission is actually attempting to mitigate that exact scenario. They are prioritizing practical tools over dense legal prose, specifically highlighting the inclusion of 67 practical examples within the guidance.
The specificity of 67 distinct scenarios is a very deliberate tactical choice. They're essentially providing a localized map for different sectors of the industry.
Let's visualize how a small developer actually uses this. Say I'm building a simple Bluetooth smart light bulb. I don't want to hire a legal team to read a 60-page directive. How do these examples actually help me?
Well, instead of forcing that developer to interpret abstract definitions of, quote, remote data processing, the annex provides highly specific use cases, complete with flowcharts and graphs.
Oh, flowcharts. That's way better than legalese.
Much better. The developer can just find an example that closely mirrors their smart light bulb architecture. The flowchart might ask something simple like, does the device connect directly to the internet or only to a localized hub?
Okay.
And based on a simple yes or no, it routes the developer to the exact compliance tier they require.
That's incredibly practical.
It is. Another example might contrast a fitness tracking app that only stores data locally on the phone against a medical monitoring app that transmits data to a physician's portal. The visual elements, the flowcharts, they democratize the compliance process.
It's essentially an interactive diagnostic tool for the law itself.
That's exactly what it is. The core philosophy is embedded in a specific phrase from the text, ensuring the path to compliance is clear and proportionate without unnecessary administrative burden.
So they're trying not to suffocate them.
Right. They are aggressively hand-holding the SMEs through the process to ensure the baseline security of the European market is raised without triggering a mass extinction event for startups.
This approach feels indicative of a wider shift in regulatory strategy, honestly. The text mentions that this July 2026 guidance is part of broader efforts towards simplification, and it specifically references the Digital Omnibus, published earlier in November 2025.
Yes.
How does this specific document fit into that larger political context? What is the Digital Omnibus?
The Digital Omnibus provides essential context for the Commission's current posture. Over the past few years, the European Union has deployed an unprecedented volume of digital regulation.
Like the Digital Services Act, right?
Yes, the Digital Services Act, the Digital Markets Act, the AI Act, and now the CRA. The tech industry reached a point of severe regulatory fatigue. They were arguing that overlapping, sometimes conflicted rules were making basic operations almost impossible.
Because you can't innovate if you spend 80% of your capital just deciphering intersecting mandates.
Exactly. The Digital Omnibus of late 2025 was the EU's formal acknowledgement of that friction. It was an overarching initiative to streamline, harmonize, and simplify the dense regulatory landscape.
Okay, so it's a cleanup effort.
Right.
Yeah.
By explicitly linking the new CRA guidance to the Digital Omnibus, the Commission is signaling a commitment to what they call an agile rulebook.
An agile rulebook implies flexibility. It's a huge departure from the traditional model of passing a static law and just waiting to levy fines against anyone who trips over the red tape.
It is a transition toward collaborative regulation. The Commission wants the ecosystem to be secure, obviously, but they recognize it must remain vibrant and globally competitive.
Right.
Providing 67 actionable examples, non-binding interpretations, and flowcharts, that is an active investment in the industry's success rather than just a punitive oversight mechanism.
Which raises the question of origin. Where did these 67 highly specific examples actually come from? The text reveals the background process, noting it wasn't just dreamt up by bureaucrats in a closed room. It mentions an expert group on cybersecurity of products with digital elements.
The composition of that expert group is critical. It involves industry veterans, cybersecurity researchers, technical architects, and consumer advocates.
So people who actually build and use the stuff.
Exactly. But the process extended beyond closed-door expert panels. The text cites a public consultation period that occurred earlier in 2026.
Meaning the indie developers and the SMEs actually had a mechanism to voice their immediate anxiety.
They did. The flowcharts and scenarios weren't randomly theorized. They were effectively reverse-engineered from the panic itself.
That's fascinating.
The Commission gathered the most frequent complex questions submitted during the public consultation, questions about open source liability, cloud processing boundaries, and that scary 24-hour reporting window, and built the 67 examples to directly dismantle those specific points of confusion.
But the inevitable problem with regulating technology is the pace of innovation, right?
Always.
A flowchart designed in July 2026 might perfectly explain the compliance route for a smart light bulb or a thermostat today. But what happens in 18 months when an entirely new category of, like, spatial computing hardware or neural interface software hits the market, and it doesn't fit into any of the 67 existing examples? Does the guidance instantly become obsolete?
The text addresses the perpetual challenge of technological velocity directly. The guidance is designed as a living document.
Oh, a living document.
Yes. The text explicitly cites Article 26 of the Cyber Resilience Act, stating that the Commission remains committed to supporting stakeholders and will consider issuing further guidance as needed.
So by anchoring that promise in Article 26, they are legally codifying the dialogue. They are acknowledging that version 1.0 of the guidance will inevitably require a version 1.1 when the landscape shifts.
Yeah. It proves they are viewing enforcement as an iterative process. Regulating a dynamic field requires a dynamic instrument. They aren't abandoning the industry to figure out the edge cases of the future alone.
That's reassuring.
And for anyone navigating this immediate transition, the text notes that the official communication, which is referenced as C 2026 53252, and the annex containing all those flowcharts and examples are available for download right now.
So they are the literal architectural blueprints for the next generation of European digital infrastructure.
They absolutely are.
We've covered a massive amount of technical and regulatory ground today.
We really have.
We started with the sheer vulnerability of a baby monitor and the historical lack of safety guarantees in our digital ecosystem. Then we examined the timeline driving the current panic, those September 2026 reporting deadlines, and the December 2027 main obligations.
Right.
And we explored the deep mechanics of the Commission's solution, defining the commercialization boundary for open source code, untangling the liability of remote cloud servers, establishing the exact threshold for substantial modifications, and of course, the logistical heavy lift of the 24-hour incident reporting window.
And we also analyzed the Commission's broader strategy to protect those smaller developers through the 67 practical flowcharts, reflecting the agile rulebook philosophy of the digital omnibus and an ongoing iterative collaboration with the tech industry.
So what does this all mean? Well, whether you are a software architect scrambling to restructure your cloud dependencies to meet the September reporting requirements, or you're just a consumer planning to buy a new connected device next year, this legal framework fundamentally alters the terrain.
It does.
The burden of security is being forcefully shifted away from the end user and permanently attached to the manufacturer across the entire lifespan of the product.
It is a profound reallocation of responsibility.
Before we wrap up, I want to leave you with a final thought regarding those mandated support periods we talked about. We discussed how requiring companies to maintain security patches for years challenges the whole model of planned obsolescence.
The secondary effects of that specific mandate are just fascinating to consider.
Right. Because if the Cyber Resilience Act successfully forces the tech industry to legally commit to long, robust support periods, meaning devices remain secure, functional, and updated for 5 to 7 years, will this inadvertently dismantle our cultural addiction to disposable technology?
It's a great question. The economic incentive to churn out a marginally different smartphone or smartwatch every 12 months collapses if the manufacturer is legally bound to support the previous 5 generations simultaneously.
The sheer cost of maintaining the software for all those older models might force them to finally slow down the hardware release cycle.
Exactly. We might actually witness a massive reduction in global e-waste and a profound shift away from hyperconsumption, all sparked not by an environmental treaty, but by the highly technical requirements of a cybersecurity regulation.
It's incredible to think that a definition hidden inside a bureaucratic flowchart could ultimately alter global manufacturing economies. Thank you so much for taking this deep dive with us today. It's a dense topic, but these are the mechanisms silently rewriting the rules of the devices we hold in our hands every day. We'll be back soon to unpack the next major shift. Until then, keep questioning what's going on beneath the surface.